If you're looking to get the absolute best out of your DJI OSMO Pocket 3, you're in the right place, because today I'm sharing my top 5 tips that'll transform your footage and give you rich cinematic results. Everything in this video is designed to give you footage that will trick people into thinking you shot it with a camera 10 times the cost of this thing. We'll dive into the best settings, the must-have accessories, and my secret sauce that'll elevate your color grading. So trust me, you don't want to miss tip number 5. First things first, set your camera to shoot in d-logm. This unlocks a flat picture profile that gives you the potential to create cinematic images that are usually reserved for, much higher end cameras. While it's not a true log profile, d-logm still offers plenty of room to push your footage around in the grade. Yes, shooting in d-logm means extra work in color grading, but trust me, the payoff is worth it, and I have some tools that should save you some time in the grade, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Grading footage in this log profile is what's really going to allow you to unlock the true potential of this tiny little powerhouse. Okay, next up, let's talk about settings, because getting these right is crucial for capturing the best quality footage. I always shoot in 4K, and since I'm in the UK, I either stick to 25 frames a second or 50 frames a second, depending on the look I'm going for. And I think to get the best footage, the most cinematic footage, you'll want your exposure and white balance settings to be locked down as much as possible. So that's why I shoot in manual and pro mode, so I can dial everything in and have full control over the look I want out of this camera. So a key rule here, make sure you're always setting your shutter speed to double what your frame rate is. So if you're shooting in 25 frames a second, make sure your shutter speed is 1/50th of a second, and so on. This is what allows you to get you that sort of silky smooth, cinematic footage, if you will. Shooting with a shutter speed that's too high can result in quite jittery motion, something that looks like it's coming out of a mobile phone, and it's just not going to look very nice. And if it's too low, you're going to get too much motion blur and it's going to look a bit weird. So make sure you're observing that rule. And every time you're changing the frame rate, you're also changing your shutter speed. Also, make sure to fix your white balance according to the environment you're in. So for daylight, generally it's around 5,600 Kelvin. Best to get the white balance as close as possible to what you need it to be, so you don't have to make too many adjustments in post. Lastly, keep your ISO as low as possible to minimize noise. So we're working with a small sensor on this camera, so it is susceptible to noise when you push the ISO up and in low light. There's 2 ways to manage ISO. You can either give it one single static value, or you can provide a range of which the camera can move between. Static values are best if you're just doing a static shot and the lighting's not changing, whereas more often than not I prefer working with the ISO range and giving the camera an ISO range to move between to pull exposure. Because of the nature of this camera, you're often moving around and light levels are changing. In either case, I would recommend not exceeding 1600 ISO and keeping that as the absolute maximum, because over that the noise becomes a little bit too troublesome. Also, make sure that sharpening and noise reduction settings are set to the lowest values. That will just help you maintain that clean look, keep it looking less digital and over sharpened. ND filters are going to be your best friend with this camera, especially when shooting in bright light. Think of them as like sunglasses for your camera. So they allow you to control your exposure without having to change your shutter speed. They allow you to lock your shutter speed, which is essential for maintaining that cinematic motion blur. So I picked up a set from Amazon. I think they're Freewell branded. I've got a big set of them. I carry them around with me all the time when I'm out with this camera, and they've been an absolute lifesaver and an essential purchase in bright conditions. So these filters come in different strengths, allowing you to properly expose your footage while keeping that shutter speed locked. And yes, they can be kind of fiddly taking them on and off, and yes, you're definitely going to smear them with your fingerprints, but they're a necessity. I think you need to buy them if you're going to be working with this camera. You can get variable NDs as well for this camera, which offer a little bit more flexibility because you can adjust the strength of them, but from what I've seen, the solid NDs are just superior in quality. You can also get polarizing filters, which are also an option, but just be careful of these. I've used them on a few occasions and they can make the skies quite overly intense, and also the strength of the polarization can change if you're rotating the gimbal head and the lens. So the intensity of the sky color can change as the camera rotates round, and it might look a little bit distracting, so just be careful with that. As for mist filters, I've tried them. I prefer to avoid them, to be honest. They create a sort of hazy, dirty lens look, which is more akin to a sort of dirty iPhone. So I kind of stay away from these Pro Mist filters, and I prefer to add diffusion and highlight bloom in post-production, as it gives me much more control and I can really dial it in or leave it out if I want to, rather than having it sort of like locked into my footage. Watch those highlights. One of the key lessons I've learned with the Osmo Pocket 3 is the importance of exposing for your highlights. So clipping your highlights can instantly reveal the limitations of the small sensor in this camera. So when you have footage with these blown out highlights, it just looks really cheap and harsh and something that's more similar to like shooting on a mobile phone, and it really gives the game away. So, you know, the most common culprits are going to be bright skies, clouds, or if you're inside, blown out windows. So balancing your image can be tricky with your highlights, because the Osmo's small sensor doesn't have a huge dynamic range, but it's really crucial to sort of keep on top of those highlights and avoid blowing them out. Sometimes this might mean slightly underexposing elements of your image, but I think that's a compromise I'm willing to make to preserve those highlights. So the Osmo Pocket 3 does prefer to slightly overexpose the image. So if you're using something like the ISO range setting, I would also just dial in some negative exposure compensation just to counteract that a little bit and make sure that it's not pushing the image too bright and clipping your highlights. So if you have got bright skies and clouds in your image, just be careful. It is quite tricky to balance that, especially if your subject is underexposed. So it's always going to be a creative decision when you're using this camera. So if you followed all of the previous tips, you should have some solid footage to work with in post. But this final step is where the real magic happens. So this is color grading. Since I got the Osmo Pocket 3, I've spent a lot of time figuring out how to squeeze the best image out of this thing. The result of this is a custom look that I've developed into an easy to use LUT pack. It's called Palermo, which is available on my online store, and it's also available as a power grade for anyone who works in DaVinci Resolve as well. So Palermo is basically designed to give your footage like really rich, deep, organic tones that resemble the qualities of film. This is designed to work in any software that basically accept LUTs. So anything from Premiere, Final Cut 10, CapCut. It comes with a bunch of pre-made looks for quick grades that you can just drag one LUT on and achieve some really nice looks. But it also comes with a bunch of stackable LUTs that you can use to sort of build your own custom looks. So for instance, by adding the base Palermo LUT, you can then stack elements like color density to give a boost to the colors, and then you can add another LUT like to push warmth into it or to push more cold tones into it. And there's a bunch of these that you can experiment with, and within this you can, you know, create a huge number of different variations and combinations and different looks that are all completely customizable to your personal taste. For those of you who work in DaVinci Resolve, Palermo is also available as a power grade, and if you buy the power grade you also get the LUT pack too. This is the version I tend to use as I work in Resolve, and it adds just a little bit more flexibility because it can include stuff like grain, highlight bloom, softening, and noise reduction. But whichever you use, you know, it's designed to be used by users of all skill levels. So there's the really simple LUT workflow, or if you want to go a bit deeper, you can try the power grade. Since I've developed Palermo, it's really sped up my workflow, as I just apply this, tweak it a little bit, and it's pretty much good to go in a few minutes or a few clicks. So I really like the deep reach look it adds to my OP3 footage, and everything you've seen in this video has been graded with it. So do check it out if you like the look of it. And there you have it, 5 essential tips to help you get the most out of your DJI Osmo Pocket 3. As always, if you found this video helpful, make sure to hit that like button, and please consider subscribing if you haven't already. But that's it, I'm Ed, thanks for watching, and until next time, see ya.